Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on our weekly briefing. As has been the case for most weeks lately, a lot happened this week, so excited to talk about it. We'll start on a positive note. We have 2 pools open in the city of Syracuse. The picture that you see here is Schiller Pool this morning, some nice socially distanced lap swimming. Just want to remind folks, if you want to use one of our 2 pools open right now, again, Schiller on the north side and Kirk on the south side, call the Parks Department to make an appointment. Excited, again, thanks to the generosity of many in the community, that will be opening up Onondaga Park Pool and Thornton Park Pool next week on July 23rd. So again, make sure you plan ahead, get your scheduled time in, and I want to thank everyone that has contributed and supported our efforts to get 4 pools open for the summer, heading into another heat wave, so the timing couldn't be better. And I want to thank the Syracuse Parks Conservancy for their help with the Syracuse Swims On campaign. As usual, have Deputy Mayor Sharon Owens with us. Sharon, thanks for being here. Have a new guest to the weekly briefing, actually 2. Our Deputy Commissioner of Neighborhood and Business Development, Jennifer Tift, is with us. Thanks, Jen, for coming. And we also have Lamont Mitchell, who is our Director of Minority Affairs and our MWBE Compliance Officer. Lamont, thanks for coming. And Lamont and Jen will switch seats a little bit later on to update you on a couple important initiatives of ours. As usual, I want to thank the Common Council for their use of the council chambers. Run through the agenda real quick. As usual, we'll give a quick update on our COVID-19 data. Jen is going to talk about our Walton Street Outdoor Dining Initiative. Lamont's going to talk about our Grow Your Business webinar this afternoon. We'll give an update on Census. We will talk about the lead abatement and control ordinance that was passed by the Common Council this week. We'll give an update on our crime stats through COMPSTAT. Deputy Mayor will give an update on our Syracuse Police Reform Agenda. And we'll close out talking about our CUSE Adopt a Block program. So let's look at the numbers for COVID. This is through July 15th. So again, the county is the place to go for updated numbers. But as of July 15th, we are at 1,717 cases in the city of Syracuse. That's up 52 cases over the past week for a 3.1% increase. And you can contrast that with 1,485 recoveries in the city. That's up 79 over the past week, which is a 5.6% increase. So recoveries continue to outpace new cases, and that's what we want. So we're pleased to see that. Just a reminder that testing continues. We want to encourage people to go out and get tested. You can go down to the Syracuse Community Health Center until 5 p.m. today to get tested, and Community Health Center will be open again tomorrow, Saturday, from 9 to 5. So please get tested. Share our early warning monitoring dashboard that the state oversees. We have it on the Central New York region. Again, this dashboard we keep a close eye on. And looking at it this week, we chose to focus on new positive tests per day in the region. And what you can see, obviously, after being very high, is those positive tests have gone down and, importantly, stayed down even as we've continued to reopen. So we've really been at or below. We've basically stayed stable now for about more than 6 weeks. So again, especially in light of what's happening around the rest of the country, this is a good trend that we want to see continue as activity continues to pick up. We also continue to monitor our business affirmations. So as part of the reopening process, our businesses have to affirm their compliance with New York Forward guidance. And as of today, we have 629 city businesses affirmed, and that's up 6.8% over last week. So continuing to see new businesses opening up, which is great. On the topic of business, again, I mentioned that we have our Deputy Commissioner of Neighborhood and Business Development, Jen Tift, with us. Jen and her team have been very busy and very productive supporting our business community through this unprecedented pandemic. Some of the things we've highlighted previously are our SEDCO Emergency COVID Fund, where we deployed nearly $500,000 for city small businesses. We have used our right-of-way in different ways. We established some curbside pickup spots for some of our restaurants, and Jen is going to talk to you about the latest attempt to use our right-of-way in a way that supports our business community as we continue to recover. Jen.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. As the mayor was saying, my team at Neighborhood and Business Development has been enormously busy trying to think through as many ways as we can to be helpful to the business community during the reopening. And, you know, we know one of the hardest hit segments of our business population has been the restaurants and the small retailers, not just downtown, but throughout the city. So we started looking, honestly, many, many weeks ago, even while those types of businesses were still closed, frankly, into the types of streets and right-of-way that we could make available to the business community so that they could operate more of their business outdoors, which we know is a really important consideration during the COVID pandemic. So, you know, as the mayor indicated, we had previously waived fees for the use of sidewalk cafes, for example. That was one of the first things we did, but we wanted to go even further and look at potentially utilizing our streetscape as well for outdoor dining and other outdoor vending. And so starting this weekend, we're launching a pilot, and we're really excited about this on Walton Street, both the 100 block and the 200 block of Walton Street. And those blocks have been closed to vehicular traffic as of about 10 a.m. this morning, and they will remain closed through very early on Monday morning. But really our hope is to encourage folks to get out and walk around, and for the restaurants that are specifically on Walton to be able to utilize more of the streetscape to enhance their seating for patrons. We think this will not only encourage folks to get out and patronize the businesses directly on Walton, but hopefully folks can, again, walk around Armory Square and see maybe what else is open, and hopefully start to feel a little bit more comfortable, again, kind of patronizing our local restaurants and our other retailers that are downtown. One important thing I just want to highlight is that we created a how-to guide which has been distributed to basically all restaurants and retailers in the city about how to really utilize different parts of the right-of-way through existing permitting processes. And so, you know, we're very hopeful, actually, that as interest arises even outside of downtown, that we can look to other parts of the city where we can engage in similar types of things to facilitate businesses, whether they're on the east side or whether they're on the north side, you know, doing the same types of things. And we're trying to be as you know, helpful and facilitative as possible to that process. And so I just encourage, you know, anyone in the business community who has an idea to utilize either their sidewalk or maybe the parking spaces in front of their storefront, or even the street for a street closure like what we're doing on Walton, to reach out to the Department of Neighborhood and Business Development so that we can talk about how we can help them to do that. And happy to take other questions about the Walton Street closure specifically, but again, that will be closed all weekend, starting this weekend. And we will evaluate it, you know, next week after this pilot period to see, you know, how it worked. And I think our hope would be that we'll continue to do the Walton Street closure, you know, the rest of the summer moving forward, assuming all goes well. So that's the plan.
Great. Thanks, Jen. You know, again, this is all new. As I've said from the beginning of the pandemic, there's no playbook here, but we're really trying to take this opportunity to try new things. And when you try new things and you take risks, sometimes they're going to be successful, sometimes they're not. But you know, this space, sidewalks, streets, it's public right-of-way. Oftentimes, at least as it relates to our streets, it's primarily focused on automobile traffic, but it doesn't have to be. And again, especially at a time when we know the more things we can do outside, the better. This is the right time to be looking at how we can use our public spaces differently in a way that prioritizes public health and safety, but also supports our business community, which undoubtedly is hurting. So I know people are wary about coming out, but again, I think now we've ensured that you can do it even safer. And so if you feel comfortable, come out, support your local businesses. You know, they're hurting and they need it. thanks, Jen, again, for you, to you and your team for all your hard work. On a related note, I mentioned we have Lamont Mitchell here, so we'll introduce Lamont up to the table. Again, Lamont is our Director of Minority Affairs and also our MWBE, Minority Women-Owned Business Enterprise Compliance Officer. I mentioned in one of my earlier briefings that we had conducted a small business survey with Jen and her team at MBD, and we learned a lot about what is going on with our small businesses and the unique challenges they're facing during COVID-19. And we specifically heard from our minority-owned businesses that they need more help, more guidance, more resources, more access to capital. And we heard that loud and clear and wanted to continue to come up with new ways in which we can support our minority business and small business community. So Lamont is going to update you on an upcoming event. Lamont.
Hey, hello. So we're all set for 4 p.m. today to do our first program within the series. The focus will be sharing resources and information and business assistance for MWBEs, minority women-owned businesses, and small businesses within Onondaga County. We've been doing that for quite a while in the past, but being that the pandemic is here, we had to shift and find some creative ways to reach our new businesses and our existing businesses to help them do business in the community.
Great. So 4 o'clock today, right,
4 o'clock.
Lamont? Not too late to register?
Not too late to register.
So anybody that's interested, go on our website, syrgov.net, and register. You can sit in, you can listen, you can learn, maybe offer some lessons that you've learned yourself. But again, we, especially in light of the pandemic, we're trying to find new and different creative ways to engage our various stakeholders, and we know that our small business community needs help. So thank you, Lamont, for doing that, and I know you're going to stick around here, answer any questions after we get through the remaining updates. So just a few more things to share. This was a really historic week in the city of Syracuse, and one thing we've all learned during this unique time is that sometimes it's hard to get attention on things because there's so much going on. It's hard to keep up. So I wanted to take this opportunity just to come back to something that happened again earlier this week in the virtual Common Council chambers, and that was the passage of the Syracuse Lead Abatement and Control Ordinance. This is a significant step. Lead poisoning is arguably one of the most wide-reaching social and public health challenges we have here in the city of Syracuse, and it's a challenge we've been struggling with for a long time. With the passage of this ordinance, it allows us to identify high-risk areas for lead-based paint hazards. And those high-risk areas have a number of things in common, typically higher rates of older housing stock, higher rates of poverty, higher rates of rental properties, and higher rates of minority populations. Those are the areas most at risk, highest hazards, and those are the areas that we're going to be able to target through this ordinance. So it empowers code inspectors to test for lead risk even when deteriorated paint is not visible. We know oftentimes it's not. And if there is contamination, it requires the housing unit to be made lead safe. Again, I want to commend the Common Council on this. This was a unanimous vote, and in these trying times, it's hard to find a unanimous opinion on anything, but it was a unanimous vote, so a credit to all the councilors. And I do want to give a special shout out to 5th District Common Councilor Joe Driscoll, who really made this his mission since he came into office 2.5 years ago or so. He has led the charge. We have worked hand in hand with him as the administration, and we have an ordinance now. And as Councilor Driscoll and his colleagues will remind us, this is not the end. This is really just the beginning. So now the hard work begins of actually implementing the ordinance. That work is made even harder by the financial constraints that we're facing due to the pandemic. But we are going to do everything we can to get things moving and to be fully implementing the lead ordinance later this year. So wanted to make sure that wasn't missed as we close out the week. Want to give a quick update on the census, which we do every week, and consistent with recent updates, I continue to be frustrated by the self-response rate. So this week we were at 49.3%. Last week we were at 49.2%. So we are we have essentially plateaued at a time when we cannot afford to. I can't overstate how important the census is to make sure that we get all of the resources we need from the federal government to address the many challenges that we talk about in this room during these briefings, and that people are talking about out in the community and out in the streets. I know that there's a lot going on. I know that there is a lack of trust, especially among the federal government, among a number of different communities. But there are laws in place that ensure that the census is safe and that the federal government protects your information. I wouldn't be asking people to fill it out if I didn't think that it was safe. It is. And again, if we don't get everyone counted in this community, everyone in this community will suffer. Doesn't necessarily make me feel better, but for context, our experience seems to be consistent with what other upstate cities are going through. Again, we're at 49.3%, Buffalo's at 49.4%, Rochester's at 47.6%, and Albany's at 49.7%. Again, it's a challenge that we're all struggling with. We know that as cities we have a higher percentage of hard-to-count populations, but the stakes couldn't be higher, and we need to continue to push our friends, our neighbors, our family to fill out their census form. Eventually, we will have people knocking on doors, but why wait? Especially in the pandemic, you can get online, you can fill it out, you don't have to worry about anybody knocking on your door. So again, I'm pleading with the community. This is a way everyone can help by filling out your census, so please do that and encourage others to do so as well. A lot of discussion around crime and law enforcement lately, so we like to continue to share the data, which is shared not only in these briefings but weekly on SyracusePolice.org. This is our COMPSTAT weekly crime report. A few highlights from this week. So this comes out on Tuesday of every week. We are 8% below total Part 1 crime this year as compared to the same time last year. That's good. That's consistent. Last week we were at 8%. So it does vary weekly, but we held steady this week, which is a good thing. If you dig down in the numbers a little bit more, a few things stand out. The low number is being driven primarily by property crime, which is down 11% year over year. Violent crime is basically level. It's 1% up, and that's obviously a problem. You can see the homicide rate, which we did see a spike in, has leveled off, and we're actually now 7% below where we were this time last year. But that is nothing to feel good about. We lost 14 lives in this city this year, and that is tragic for all involved and totally unacceptable. So we need to continue to focus on all of our crime, specifically our violent crime, and not reflected in these numbers, but something that I'll want to talk more about in the coming weeks is about shots fired. We are seeing a very dangerous level of shots fired in this city, and when you look at these numbers, they very well could be higher. And so we need to continue to focus on gun crime in this city. There are far too many guns in the community, and far too many people, especially our young people, that are firing them. So again, big picture, crime down 8%, but I know based on the tragedies that we've seen in our community, no one feels good about where we're at, and we clearly have a lot of work to do. On the topic of crime, but more specifically law enforcement and the Syracuse Police Department, it's been well documented, the conversations that we've been having as a community, and also specifically between the administration and a number of different community organizations, protest groups, individual protesters about the issue of police reform. I've said from day one that when I walked into City Hall and Deputy Mayor Owens walked into City Hall, police accountability, police community relations was among our very top priorities, and we have worked every day to make improvements over the past 2.5+ years. From the time Chief Buckner came into office a little over a year and a half ago, we have doubled down on our efforts and made significant progress that we stand by and feel very good about. But one thing that we have, among many things that we agree with the different organizations and the protest groups out there, is that more needs to be done. And we have an opportunity to accelerate that progress, and we welcome that opportunity, and that's exactly what we're doing. And that was, I think, reflected in the response that we provided yesterday to the 9 demands, from the 9 demands on behalf of the various protest groups. Deputy Mayor Owens put a ton of time into that document, working with Chief Buckner, myself, and our teams. And again, it's a new way to ensure accountability. It's one thing to say you're going to do something. The next level of accountability is to say when you're going to do it. And we did that. Again, I'm proud of our work. We know we have a lot more to do, but I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Mayor Owens to talk about that document that we produced yesterday and a little bit of more detail around it. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. The mayor has really spoken to many of the points for Syracuse police reform and my position to continue to move it forward. A couple weeks ago, we spoke to you about the executive order that was presented by the mayor. We have an internal group to keep those to the point that the mayor is making. It's one thing to lay it out, put it on paper. It's another thing to make sure that we attach processes and timelines to those items. That's my task, to keep us on track when it comes to the executive order. What we were on task to do as a commitment to the meeting that we had on July 2nd here in the chambers was to provide feedback to the 9 demands that were presented to us by the People's Agenda for Police Reform. We released that yesterday and have addressed each one of those demands in that document that has also been made public. Got my notes on my phone, sorry. So we do. As the mayor said, it is an urgent priority. We're addressing demands of police reform made by the coalition, and we have presented a timeline that addresses these issues that some that have either been completed, we will get done between 30 days or within up to 6 months. So we have a time frame that of all those 9 demands, all but one will, from where we stand, be able to be addressed and a process initiated during 2020, which I think I'm proud of our commitment to doing that. We've heard directly from individuals in this community that we need to do something. It needs to be done quickly, but we also want to do it efficiently and accurately. So among those responses was legislation for the right to know. In that document, the Walsh administration agrees with this demand. And it agrees with the demand to enhance our body-worn camera policy. We agree with that. We are working through, as has just gone through the Common Council for approval, to have us procure additional body-worn cameras. We also will be providing the structure and the infrastructure. There's intricate processes that have to happen with body-worn cameras to ensure that they are communicating appropriately with our 911 system. That is critical. And then, of course, there has to be training to the officers so they know how to use it and when. So we are in agreement with enhancing the body-worn camera policy with clarification. And where that clarification comes is when it comes to the use of the body-worn camera footage for officers. While we see that use of body-worn camera footage, if the ultimate goal is to have accurate police reports, body-worn cameras are a tool that can do that. What is in discussion is whether or not officers should be reviewing those body-worn cameras while they are or before they are writing their reports. We will continue to review that policy. There is, I think, weight on both stances of that, but we need to continue to look at it. I believe, and this is my personal opinion, that accuracy of the report is the most important thing. And if the report is what's used to further for legal procedures or for court procedures many times, or for accountability and for record of an incident, it is important that what is recorded and what is actually documented is in sync with each other. But we need to continue to review that policy. I know that making statements that continue to review are not popular, but they're necessary. Not only that policy, but every policy we have, they're not worth their salt if they're not fluid and we're not constantly re-looking at them and updating them as needed. Moving on to the next one was the PBA contract. We are in agreement, again with clarification. So you will find the PBA, variations of the PBA contract on the Syracuse Police Department website and our city page of our city blog page. You will find them both there. The clarification is that there was a request regarding renegotiating parts of the previously voted down version of the contract. Because it is pending arbitration, we cannot go back in and begin to change any of those components of that. We legally can't do that. That is the clarification. But the actual publishing of every version that we have to date is up and available to the public right now. Passed legislation to strengthen the Citizen Review Board and recommendations to sustain findings while maintaining a board as a citizen-driven accountability board. The Walsh administration is in agreement with that demand as well. Excuse me. We are in agreement with that demand as well. We have to defer that to the Common Council. And the reason is by local law, the Citizens Review Board was formatted and created by the Common Council. Any changes to their operations has to be implemented and voted by the Common Council. So we deferred that demand to the Common Council, and I'm sure that they are ready and prepared to move forward as they see fit on that demand. The next one was demilitarizing the police using the Ferguson report as a guide and minimal standards. This part of the conversation for me was very interesting. On the second, there were a lot of conversations around equipment that we have in the past many times have been given or purchased that is deemed as military in nature. We have committed to inventorying that information. We have committed to creating policies and procedures for the deployment of that equipment, and we also are committed to procurement regulations and requirements that we internally will follow for any future acquisition of that type of equipment. Also, a major part of that conversation was the use of drones in our community. And I may be skipping ahead of the slides a little bit, but it all goes together. The mayor will be executing at the end of the year an executive order that requires any department seeking to procure surveillance technology. Now, let's be clear. The mayor made this point on the second. We have no facial recognition equipment or technology that the city of Syracuse is using. As we continue to move forward being a smart city, we will be learning about new technology, and the mayor will be issuing at the end of the year an executive order that will require all departments to identify technology that could be deemed as surveillance in nature. We will be commissioning an internal and external stakeholder group that will be, whose job will be to vet whether or not it is surveillance technology, and if it is deemed that it is, it will have to be approved by the Common Council. And that is the checks and balances for us, for as we move to increase our technological abilities as a smart city, we are protecting the privacy of our citizens at the same time. Extremely important for us. Did I miss anything? No. Redirect resources away from SPD and invest in human services and reduce the overall role of policing in our community. We agree to this demand with clarifications. The mayor just spent quite a bit of time talking about our financial situation. We absolutely believe, and Chief Buckner has been at the forefront of this, to say that not all calls required a sworn police officer. So there are models that we have been given by individuals in our community, that we have researched ourselves, that we're looking at the best scenarios by which we can create a process that we identify. What are the calls that don't necessarily need a sworn officer to report to? And so there are a variety of those options. We've laid those out as some of the items that can be identified, not an all-inclusive list of calls that could be done by other than a sworn police officer. And in those instances, our officers, while they have been trained to be the best at law enforcement, may not be the expert in the various areas that we need alternative means of response, whether that is domestic violence related issues, whether that is homelessness, which we do a lot of now. Our officers are not the first responders. Our homeless response teams, they are the first responders. And so we look to really develop that more. The People's Coalition also asked for us to look at a participatory budgeting process. We talked about that last year. The school district has a tool that we believe is viable. We are going to be looking at how to implement that tool to create a process by which we can identify these models that we're talking about need finances to back them up. I say all of that again, reminding all of the public, this is not an excuse. This is a reality check. We have a serious fiscal issue with the city of Syracuse that we are grappling with right now. The mayor has, I don't believe there's been one briefing that he has not made an appeal to our federal delegation and Congress about the need for our federal assistance. It is critical. Without that, we are looking at serious operational and staffing issues as we move forward, which will affect any of all of this reform that we're looking to do. So I make the plea on behalf of the mayor, call our federal delegation, make your voice known that our communities are in need of this federal aid. We believe there's some progress going on, but until I see a check, I can't rely on that. And last but not least, SROs in our schools. We again agree with this demand. However, we defer again to the school board who has governance over this. They are meeting next Wednesday, 4:30, in a Skype. Their business meeting is next Wednesday at 4:30. And then we are meeting with members of the school district 2 weeks from then to begin to pull apart this discussion to have a productive meeting going forward about what security in the schools will look like. The school district is grappling right now with what education in the school will look like this fall. So this is another layer of decision-making that will have to happen. Mayor?
Great. Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Obviously, there's a lot there, and again, a lot of work went into it. Just one point of clarification on the Citizen Review Board. As we stated in the in the response, that we do defer to the Common Council because the Citizen Review Board is a product of Common Council legislation. That being said, I just want to make a few things clear about our approach to the CRB. We welcome the partnership of the CRB. We want to empower the CRB, and I think any honest broker who's been involved in the relationship between this administration, the police department, and the CRB would agree that we have made significant progress in building that relationship with them. We and I specifically see great value in the role of the Citizen Review Board. One area of disagreement, and again, ultimately the council has authority, is on the ability for the CRB to actually implement discipline on police officers. The purpose of the CRB is to hold all of us accountable, but the area of police officer discipline is one that we've spent a lot of time on and are in the process of litigating because we took a proactive step of ending the existing process of discipline, which has been historically a subject of negotiation that involves an arbitration process. We moved it out of that process to, we believe, a much more transparent process whereby the authority to discipline rests with the chief. That proposed process allows for officers to object to those disciplinary actions and to have a process for a hearing. That hearing in our proposed process would be a open public hearing where people would be able to view what happens. Again, we believe that transparency is our friend, and we would have a hearing officer that would make the final determination. So that's the process that we have identified. We believe that it improves police discipline, improves transparency, but it is different than the process that has been suggested as it relates to the CRB. So I think we are very much in agreement to empower the CRB and work with them. But I just wanted to make that clarification on discipline because it is currently a subject of litigation between the administration and the Police Benevolent Association. There has also been state legislation that's being introduced to try to achieve that outcome on discipline as well. Okay, so again, happy to answer questions. I know there's a lot there, and it will be an ongoing conversation. Before we do, just one more call to action. We launched our CUSE Adopt-A-Block program at the beginning of this week. Like everything else, the city administration can't do this work alone. We have great teams at DPW, at Codes that work really hard to keep our city clean, but we need help. And we launched the Adopt-A-Block program as a way to empower and encourage residents to, businesses, other stakeholders to come out and help us adopt a minimum of 2 blocks. We have a map on our website which shows you what blocks have been adopted. It's a really important quality of life issue for the city and for this administration, and it's a great way to help out your community, your neighborhood, where you work, where you play. So if you want to lend a hand, it's perfectly easy to socially distance and go pick up some trash, as you can see where I was at the launch. And I'd encourage you to get on seargov.net/cleanupcuse to sign up to adopt a couple blocks for us. So with that, happy to open it up to questions. Remind the media in the room we have our microphone in the back. So fire away.
I guess my question has to deal with this past week with the governor changing the stipulations regarding bars and restaurants. From the city standpoint, I saw what you did with what's going to happen on Walton Street. Are you in the process of constantly trying to figure out and try and be one step ahead of what's going on? Do you guys talk about this, brainstorm things to kind of figure this out? Because you seem to jump on it pretty quickly.
Well, we have our daily regional control room calls with state officials. Sometimes we get advance notice on things, other times not so much, but we talk about it every day and we think about it every day, and we try to make sure that as much as we can, we are, if not getting out ahead of the changes, at least keeping up with them. Because it's hard. I've had constituents ask me, how many people can we bring together? What's open? It's hard to keep track of. And I say, as mayor, it's hard to keep track of. That it's a fluid situation. It changes regularly, and it's also impacted by the health data. And I think what you saw from Governor Cuomo was a reaction to what we've seen since we've reopened. And while I'm glad to say here in Onondaga County, we have not seen any community spread or cases directly related to bars or restaurants. It is obviously a concern in other parts of the state, especially New York City. And I think you saw Governor Cuomo react to that concern. But it wasn't anticipated, and I certainly am sympathetic to a business owner, especially in particular a bar owner, who may not offer a whole heck of a lot other than alcohol. And so we've heard from some of those individuals and business owners. We're trying to help them through what is obviously a very difficult situation. But the reality is, I think from the beginning, whether you agree or disagree, or we might do things differently, I think we believe that the decisions that are coming out of Albany are based on, what's in the best interests of people's public health and safety. And so that decision making comes from Albany, and it's our job here at the city level and at the county level, and I work every day with County Executive McMahon and his team to try to mitigate the negative impact of any of those decisions, and ultimately try to get creative and figure out ways in which to help people through them. So this latest decision is just another example of how we're going to have to pivot and get creative about how we can help businesses through it.
I have a few questions regarding the response to the People's Agenda.
Sure.
So firstly, it seemed like the People's Coalition was under the impression that those demands would be addressed with a yes or no. Instead, the response was providing feedback. That said, this is for both you, Deputy Mayor and Mayor. Is there going to be a process where the People's Coalition might be involved in these reviews that you guys have addressed in the response?
So just to go back on the second, and I've had this conversation with a member of the coalition. When we left that room, I think everybody was exhausted, but we left that room, there wasn't a definitive how we were going to come back and address. So the commitment we made was in 2 weeks, we will provide you an answer, and they were very particular about a timeline, to the mayor's point. Words are words unless you have some timeline attached to it. That's what we provided yesterday. There is no way that we're going to be able to move forward on all of this. We're going to have internal process, but we have to come to a table and have very concrete conversations about how we move forward on these things. That is where the work gets done. The efforts of members in our community voicing their First Amendment rights, that's how change happens. And now to come full circle on change is getting pen to paper and getting in and having those conversations. That was a long response, I believe, to a yes answer.
Well, it's the expectation that members of the People's Coalition will be involved in these, because there's individual timelines for some of these demands. So are they going to be involved in some of these review processes and either deferring to the Common Council? Will there be an active participation from them?
I can't speak for the Common Council or the school board. I anticipate continued conversation. Let me be clear. There was conversation before we got here, right. And there were meetings in rooms before we got here. We can't continue without doing that again. What we're going through right now makes that difficult and less practical, but it was happening before. It must continue after. Yes.
And just to add to that, again, to the Deputy Mayor's point, this is not new work that we're involved in here. It's been going on since day one, and we've had a lot of different ways in which we've engaged the community. Some of those individuals associated with the coalition have been engaged previously. Some of them haven't. Either way, we welcome their involvement and everyone else's involvement in this. We have been, I think you've heard even that members of that group acknowledge that this administration has been more inclusive than any before in terms of bringing people to the table. We were doing that before the recent protests, and we're going to do it after. And so that those individuals and stakeholders will all be welcome at the table. I think in coming to the table, there has to be an understanding that many of these issues that we're dealing with aren't as simple as distilling to a yes or no answer or to a specific time frame or deadline. Deputy Mayor and I talked about this a lot as we prepared our response. What we committed to was a time frame, and we could have very easily just provided a number of dates. But we thought, out of respect for the individuals that we're engaging with, as well as for the community that we're serving, we owed them more than just a simple yes or no answer and a date. We tried to strike the right balance of providing context for the ways in which we're making decisions, context for how we're going to meet the deadline. That's the thoughtful approach that we have taken to these issues and will continue to take, and we welcome others that are willing to take a similarly thoughtful approach, because again, I think when you take a step back and you look at what we provided, what you see is that there's general agreement on the vast majority of these topics. So let's acknowledge that, and then let's sit down and get down to the work of actually making these things happen. That's what we're focused on right now.
One of the points that was made to me several times throughout the course of the week was specifically about the use of force policy, and that this was brought, as you mentioned, in the response to your attention in July 2019. But even at yesterday's rally, many members of SPARC mentioned that explicit recommendations were presented, and there is confusion and misunderstanding as to why the city has not adopted those recommendations, that they had used the Police Executive Research Forum and the International Association of Police Chiefs for guidelines. They are confused, upset, frustrated why the recommendations have not been adopted and why it's not going to be adopted, or there won't be word on it until October of this year.
So there's a few things there. Number one, again, the time frame that you're referencing, July 2019, was shortly after we had just revised the use of force policy, with opportunities for input from the community. What we had received from the group after we had revised and published the use of force policy, which again, as you can see from our October timeframe, it is not a simple. It's not a simple process. Some people may want it to be, but it's not, because not only do you have to establish that policy, but then you have to train people to that. You have to train the officers to that policy. And so, at the time that we received the alleged criticisms or shortcomings of our existing policy, we had just adopted ours, and we had just trained our officers to it. So practically speaking, it wasn't the right time to immediately change it again. We felt that we had made enough substantial changes where the right thing to do was to give it time for the police department to become accustomed to it and to learn from it, because you can't only just learn from best practices. You have to learn from what happens on the streets, and I think that a year later now, we have learned from it, and on top of that, other things have changed. So within the response, what you see is, in addition to the document that was provided by SPARC, which we value, we have reviewed it, and we're going to review it again, and we will adapt certain recommendations that are within that document. But we had recent state law change as it relates to chokeholds. We have different evolving standards from the Department of Criminal Justice at the state. There's a number of other factors that will contribute to how and when we update that policy. So I'm perfectly comfortable with the time frame in which we're working with, and I think the October time frame for a revised policy is perfectly appropriate, given the amount of time and effort that goes into it. I understand the frustration, but we're comfortable with our time frame, and I think our time frame does reflect the urgency that we feel.
Okay. Last question, so I can stop domineering the mic. But I would love an opportunity to sit down with both you, Deputy Mayor and Mayor, at some point to go more in depth with this, because I don't think it can be answered in a press conference.
Sure.
But lastly, Deputy Mayor, you had mentioned alternative responses from the police department, and one of the concerns for activists in the coalition is how will that be funded, because we're looking for elements like social workers, mental health workers. Is there an idea of how something would be funded like that, or would it be from the police department's budget?
Again, we would have to look at the police department's budget, the Fuller City Department's budget. I give you an example, the trauma response team, who is a brilliant, group of individuals that are proactively, for every gunshot we hear, there are those we don't hear because of the work they're doing. The city funds them at the tune of $200,000. So that effort has already been part of the city's budget. We'll begin to look at within the police budget, as well as other areas around our budget, where we can look at where that is applicable, because we do agree a sworn officer should not be the first response, and it's been proven in other communities that it is a way to go about it.
Okay, thank you both.
Thanks.
This question is for Mayor and Deputy Mayor, just going off of the response. We spoke with protesters who were outside of City Hall yesterday, and some still don't seem to be satisfied with the responses that were given yesterday. So I guess my question is, what is your response to them who may not be on board with what was addressed yesterday.
We didn't write this thinking that people are going to look at it and say we nailed it 100%. That would be unrealistic to us. This is where the work happens. When you philosophically agree but don't agree on how to get there, this is where the work happens. This is where we get down to the business of peeling apart. Where do we disagree? Where are we not? And more importantly, where are we agreeing and how do we get? I didn't expect people to fully agree with what we put forward. That would be foolish of me. And I pride myself in not being a foolish person.
I was wondering if anybody had a comment about last night's officer-involved shooting. Any more details you might, either of you or Mr. Mitchell, if you have a comment about it, might be able to share?
So I'll simply say, I mean, obviously, very scary incident. I was in touch with Sheriff Conway this morning, given the fact that it was the sheriff's deputies involved. They do help us quite often with different details within the city of Syracuse. But again, scary situation, appreciative of the sheriffs, the deputies, and also the Syracuse Police Department and the officers for their prompt response to the incident. And glad that it wasn't worse, but you know, we do have an individual in the hospital, and my thoughts are with that family. It's just another example of the danger that's out there in the community, especially as it relates to gun violence. So you know, grateful for the prompt response of law enforcement, and you know, thinking and praying for the family and everyone involved in this traumatic incident.
This is for the mayor or the deputy mayor. You've already described the negotiations and the demands, meeting them as work. How confident are you, how optimistic are you that you're going to meet somewhat in the middle and actually get that work done?
I'm confident. I think that we all believe that depending on the perspective that we're coming from, it's all from the same place, doing what's best for the citizens of this community. So I think that if we all keep that in mind, we're able to get to a place where we can agree on most points.
Yeah. I would just add to that, you know, our job, and you know, I think we learn this more and more every day. Our job is not to make everyone happy. It's to do the right thing. And that's what we're doing on the issue of police reform. And again, as the Deputy Mayor said, I think we all generally agree on where we want to get to. Now we get down to work on how we get there.
As an earlier question alluded to, there are still some people, and you guys expected this, that are not quite happy with your response. Have you spoken with any of the maybe protesters that are still upset?
Not at this point. I fully think that they're probably digesting it right now and thinking about, and I fully expect that they'll probably respond to us.
Have you spoken with any of the leaders of the coalition?
I have, not since yesterday, but I have. Okay.
Do you have any plans, set plans on speaking with them one-on-one, or?
Probably. I want to respect the process, so I don't want to speak for the coalition, but we have to talk. Yes, definitely. It's a whole lot of talking about it need to happen.
Right.
Absolutely.
So do you have any idea as to when those negotiations,
No.
those conversations?
Not sitting here today. No.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor, you expressed a concern about the number of shots fired in the city, and this might not be something you brought with you, but do you have numbers on how that's trending over time, or in what neighborhoods, and is there evidence that some of that is related to gang activity?
So I didn't come prepared with those numbers, Tim, other than just saying that we know that year over year, and actually over the past few years, shots fired numbers are up, and it's something that's not unique to Syracuse. It's happening. Just looking at all the upstate cities, shots fired are up along the thruway and in New York City as well. So I will come with more data in a future briefing and talk more about that because it is a real concern of ours. We had our gun violence task force meeting. Was that this week, Sharon? It's
Yeah.
hard to- yeah. So the county executive and I co-chair a gun violence task force that convened earlier this week. We convene kind of on an as-needed basis a few times a year, and we met. It's every level from city, county, state, federal. It's something that we're all cognizant of and working through, but it's definitely a concern, and I'll be happy to share more about that.
Okay, and have you set a timeline yet for when you would like the committee to make a recommendation about Columbus Circle?
Yeah, so we've assembled the Columbus Circle Action Group. We've named the committee. The intention is to meet about 8 times between now and mid-September. So people can expect to hear more at that point. Any other questions?
Just a question about SROs. You said that the school district is meeting next Wednesday, and then within those couple weeks, you'll have a discussion with them. But can you just expand a little bit more on where the city stands with having SROs in the schools? You said that you agree, but you want to defer this decision ultimately to the school district.
Yeah, so I think that, listen, I think you've heard from Chief Buckner, you've heard from the Deputy Mayor, you've heard from me. If it was as simple as just asking, can you take the Syracuse Police Department out of the schools, Chief Buckner would be happy to have those officers doing other police work. And I'm certainly open to that idea. There's nothing, I don't feel compelled to keep our police officers in there, except that without them, we don't have a plan. So that the whole purpose of the executive order was to acknowledge a couple things. One, that ultimately, it is the security and safety of our schools and those that learn and teach in those schools. So ultimately, the school district has to drive the process of what that outcome looks like. So I don't feel comfortable making a unilateral decision to say, yes, I'm going to take police officers out of the schools, because I don't know what the other side of that looks like, and the stakes are too high. We're talking about our young people. I want to make sure that before we do anything with our police officers, that we have a plan to keep our kids safe. And at the point that we get to that plan, and assuming it doesn't involve police officers, we will happily take them out. But I'm not going to do that before we have a plan in place. And I know that I can look our kids in the eyes, look their parents in the eyes, and tell them that I believe that they're going to be safe.
Just shifting towards the investigation with the Attorney General's office, do you have any update on that in any way, shape, or form?
No real update. We acknowledge that we're working with the New York State Attorney General's office on police policies and Syracuse Police Department policies and practices. Something that, as you've heard, we were working on already, and we welcome their involvement in that. No further updates.
And again, I understand that this started before the people's agenda items, but is there any way that this might trickle into the people's agenda, the negotiations with the demands?
I think you put it right. This came before any of the protests or the people's agenda. So I don't. While the subject matter may be related, the processes are not.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Hello again. So quick question pertaining to the SRO plan.
Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned that you want to make sure that there's a plan in place to ensure the safety of kids and students. And to that I ask genuinely, what is the threat that students are facing or teachers are facing?
We know, listen, the problems that we have in our community often end up in our schools as well. So we know that we've had problems with weapons in our schools. We know we've had incidents of violence in our schools. So the question is, what is the best model to ensure the safety of our students and everybody in our schools? Again, up to this point, the response is, well, we put Syracuse police officers in there in the form of SROs, which is not unique. As you've seen especially in suburban communities where, to your question about the threat, there's also been the concerned threat of an active shooter situation, which thankfully we have not had to deal with. So that's the model that's been in place. But I think that we're asking the right question right now, which is that the right model? So that should give you a sense of what we're talking about.
More specific question to the response to the demand regarding equipment in the police department. One of the questions I heard this week, because you guys had said that you were going to take an inventory of the equipment. A lot of people were curious why an inventory didn't already exist and why there was not already a record of what equipment the department has.
Well, I think, like everything else, somewhere within the department, there are records of what the assets that they have are. I'm not aware of an inventory that is specific to what would be considered, military style or military grade equipment. Frankly, part of the challenge is understanding how are we defining that the concept of militarization. I know I can speak for myself, Deputy Mayor. We do not want a militarized police department. But the reality is, given some of the violence that we face in our community, some of the tools to deal with that violence, some of the weapons used to deal with that violence, may overlap with what are used in a more military style operation. So I think that the appropriate first step is to conduct an inventory, determine what in fact we define as a military style weapon, and then be transparent about it. Again, transparency is our friend. And if we believe that we need it, explain why. And if we don't need it, then get rid of it. Again, I think it's a matter of going through those steps in order to be able to have a clearer understanding of what we have, what we don't have, and why we do.
And I wanted to ask a quick clarification question to your answer, Mayor, regarding the use of force policy. It sounded like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the issue was not so much of the recommendations and writing the use of force policy with those recommendations as it was implementing a new plan shortly after already revising the use of force plan. So that said, if that is correct, will you guys go back to the table with Spark and seek further recommendation with the time changes that have happened to change the use of force policy?
Well, I think Spark has indicated that what they've provided us with is what they believe best practice for use of force. If they have additional recommendations, we will happily accept them.
Okay. All right. That's all I have. Thanks.
All right. Okay. Everyone have a great weekend. Be safe. Take care.